it's an exhibition. We're friends now. It's all good. Make it happen.
Yeah.
Make it happen. I'm down.
What happens? It looks like you might be in better shape than Oscar. Got the abs. Always had good abs.
Look, sober 5 years. God took it away from me. I'm not gonna say it's me. It's God took it away from me. I cried out to God. To take away, this vice, because these are generational Christians, but the vice of alcoholism, and he took it away. 5 years sober, I'm in the gym Monday to Friday with my boys. In the afternoon, I'm doing my own workout, lifting weights, abs. I don't run.
Ready for Oscar.
I don't run.
Ready for Oscar.
But if Oscar says yes, let's go. I'll start running.
So Fernando Vargas wants to get back in the ring. Where do we start with Fernando? First of all, I think Fernando deserves a lot of credit. He had a very good boxing career. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily say he was a superstar, but he was definitely a star in the sport. And he had a lot of good years. He had a lot of good years in the sport. And he was good for the sport. He was a bit cocky for my taste, but nonetheless, a lot of people appreciated him. And I think he was one of those guys that sort of transcended the sport, and he brought in more of a sort of younger, hip audience to boxing. And guess what? Sometimes those fans just come in for that fighter or for a couple of fights, and then they leave. But other times, the sport retains those fans. And so you've got to give credit to guys like Fernando, who bring in those sort of fans that are sort of in the periphery of the sport. And Fernando had it, like I said, he had a good career. He made a big mistake early, where he opted to fight Felix Trinidad 2 or 3 fights before he should have, and he paid the price. Not only did he get knocked out, but he took extensive damage in that fight. I remember back then, I believe this was 2001 or 2000, I remember watching the post-fight interview and saying to myself, wow, I can already see the damage from that fight. There was something about the way he was speaking, something about his movements, where you could see that the blows had affected him. And once again, boxing is not an innocuous endeavor. It's extremely dangerous, especially in terms of head trauma. So Fernando hasn't been affected to the extent that Riddick Bowe, Tommy Hearns, or Pernell Whitaker have, where unfortunately you can barely make out what they say. However, you'd be remiss not to acknowledge that Fernando's speech pattern has definitely been altered by virtue of the brain trauma that he's encountered in the ring. Okay, you can only imagine what getting punched in the head and how that moves all the cells in your brain, all the muscle, the tissue. Our brains are not meant for that. And so, which is another conflicting sort of thing about the sport. We watch it, although we know one of the guys or both of the guys are actively getting hurt while we're enjoying ourselves watching the fights. But in terms of Fernando, if you look at Fernando, yes, he was affected, and it's notable. So you've got to think that 20 years later, someone who's already been affected, so maybe his sort of anatomy has a propensity for suffering injury from blows, where other fighters could take the same amount of blows and not show any damage. But so at this age, would it make sense, or would it be a smart decision for Fernando to re-engage in this sport and unquestionably suffer more head trauma? The only question is whether or not it'll be notable when he speaks, but you definitely suffer. I just think it's, for most people, it's just whether or not you can see it, so I'm not sure that it's a great idea for Fernando, and he's speaking about fighting, because it would be one thing if there was one fight that you always wanted to see and you never got a chance to see. And even then, these guys are way past their prime, so as an observer, there's not much entertainment value. But when you consider a guy like Fernando, he's speaking about potentially fighting with De La Hoya. I think if De La Hoya was going to fight, he would have other options where he could make more money. And besides that, if you look at Tyson and Roy, they never fought before. So that makes sense. There's kind of a question mark. With Fernando, he's calling out De La Hoya, and De La Hoya beat him, and supposedly, from all accounts, Fernando was on performance-enhancing drugs during that fight. So you've got to think, 20 years later, or however many years it is, minus the performance-enhancing drugs, like, how good would you look? And so, again, much like De La Hoya and much like any other boxer who's been off that amount of time, I don't think it's a good idea. It's if we do watch it, which many of us will, it would be more like a freak show as opposed to an event that we're genuinely excited about.
Yeah, I'll give you my 2 cents. And if you're not too sensitive, you'll be able to sense how much sense I actually make. I'm actually great.